the vast majority of the work that's performed every day in a school, which is the instructional material that we develop, and then the actual strategies that we deploy in the classroom to help students get from A to B, however you define those 2 points. Capturing that knowledge in one place so that it's readily accessible, it's easy to collaborate, and crucially, it can carry over from this year into next and be further refined. What I found, though, is that a problem that exists in schools is so pervasive and so damaging that I couldn't help but do everything in my power to solve it, especially when I had an idea for a solution that I felt really could do that. And that problem, very simply put, is that most of the knowledge that's created, most of the work that's done by teachers today in schools is never captured in any accessible, transferable way. It's easy to put it out and say, okay, we're going to break down the silos and we're going to standardize knowledge capture and make sure that it's available to everyone. That sounds great. But you have to think about the second order effects of solving this problem, right? And the second order effects of continuing to allow it to persist. Most teachers are being handed almost nothing and then having to first create a baseline and then find some time to personalize it for the needs in their classroom. Right? The hardest part of being a teacher today is that the job feels impossible. And it often is impossible to meet the needs of all of the individual students in your classroom.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the EduFuturist podcast. It is wonderful to be with you. Very much looking forward to another good conversation with a guest that's in the studio. And we are well in the thick of it in terms of EduFuturist stuff. We launched the EduFuturist community, the Wolfpack, very, very recently. And thank you to those people who have joined us. It's a way for us to grow what we're doing, develop the not just one event to another event to support and develop going forward, get involved in the AGM and some cool swag and all sorts of exclusive content. So if you haven't done so already, the link is in the show notes. But yeah, exciting time. Steve, how are you, my friend? Things good?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I can't complain at all, really. It's a juggle, either been in summer holidays, in half terms, or the thick of school drop-offs. So I'm not going to say when, but it's one of those, which is basically the time of the year, 'cause we don't talk about when we record. But yeah, life's good. It's been sunny for about 6 months, which means at some point it will be raining for another year. Yeah, life is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it's exciting to see the engagement online, post, uprising, ready for the next one, and the community building and the membership stuff is really cool. So yeah, it's nice to get that in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the book's out there in the world, and yeah, that's doing well. It's nice to see people talking about it and it getting shared, and maybe just putting a little bit of language to what a lot of people have been talking about in terms of we could do things a slightly different way, and people that are doing that. So yeah, it's been good fun, and we have got a guest in the studio, and this guest in the studio joined us. I met a few months ago, but joined us in Liverpool at EduFuturist Uprising back in June, but interestingly has chosen still to come on a podcast with us. So I suppose that must be good news, or a good thing. We must not have scared him off too badly. But Grant, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and your background that brought you to where you are.
Yeah, so my background is as a teacher. I spent a lot of time in the classroom, about a decade. That is a mix between two different types of classrooms, but both in Southeast Asia. So I taught with a nonprofit, a bit of a nonconformist route to what I'm doing now. But I started with a nonprofit in the countryside of Thailand, working in the Thai state schools. So a very unique environment. And I spent 6 years there, and then another 4 or 5 years in Bangkok at an international school teaching American curriculum to a mix of expats and local Thai students. So that is my background in teaching. And now, for the last couple of years, I've been full-time on Edusfere, which was inspired by my time in the classroom, and just recently moved to the UK to help us with our global expansion and our, hopefully, expansion into the UK market as well.
Yeah, very different to the rest of the world, as I'm sure you are finding, where it's ultimately, I think somebody likened it to business to consumer rather than business to business. You're having to deal with 27,000 individual customers that are just schools rather than actually districts, and whether your local authority or multi-academy trust, everybody gives autonomy which is
Yeah.
good in some ways, but actually buying decisions are very, very different. But tell us a bit more about Edusfere then, Joe. Like, why was it started? What problem is it trying to solve? Hopefully you found one. You're not some of those organisations that are still trying to find the problem and try and marry up a solution. But step us through that. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And ultimately, why is it so important to target the UK market when actually it's such a difficult thing to capture?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't find that expanding in the UK market is much different than what we've been doing so far because we've worked mostly with independent schools up to this point, right? It's a really good way to get into the market. If you're trying to get, like, it's easier to grow faster, bigger if you land those big contracts at the beginning, but also you need venture capital backing and you need all these things in place. You need to check all of these boxes and you're going up head to head against the biggest incumbents in the space if you want to, land those big contracts from the beginning. So if you're trying to do something new, the best place to start is actually the independent schools. And we definitely are trying to do something new here. And so because of that, and our experience navigating the independent school market, the UK market doesn't feel much different because of that autonomy that's been given to each at MATS, et cetera. But Edusfere is primarily a home for all the institutional instructional knowledge that's built up in a school or in a MAT or in a district. It's meant to be a place where the work that teachers do, right? The work that we do, the vast majority of the work that's performed every day in a school, which is the instructional material that we develop, and then the actual strategies that we deploy in the classroom to help students get from A to B, however you define those 2 points, capturing that knowledge in one place so that it's readily accessible, it's easy to collaborate, and crucially, it can carry over from this year into next and be further refined. Because you asked about the problem that we're out to solve, and honestly, I couldn't be more opposite than those that set out looking for a problem to solve because they want to be entrepreneurs. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I never wanted to be, let alone a freaking tech entrepreneur. I mean, I was working for a nonprofit in the middle of nowhere, Thailand, and I was happy doing that. Okay, I really didn't want to be a business person. What I found though is that a problem that exists in schools is so pervasive and so damaging that I couldn't help but do everything in my power to solve it, especially when I had an idea for a solution that I felt really could do that. And that problem, very simply put, is that most of the knowledge that's created, most of the work that's done by teachers today in schools is never captured in any accessible, transferable way. Right? Most teachers are islands unto themselves. They have all these great ideas. They develop new strategies, new material, and then that material is locked in whatever system they use for themselves to record their work. And it's not accessible to anyone else. And that is then lost completely when that teacher moves on and you hit reset on the whole thing. So there's no curriculum continuity. There's often new teachers coming in and having to build from scratch, even though there have been teachers in that institution for sometimes decades, right? I mean, it's a horrible state of things. And it's a tragedy in my view. So I want to solve that problem. I want to stop the knowledge loss so that we can all share and build upon each other's work instead of continuously working in these vicious cycles of like isolation, development, and then reset.
Yeah, they are definitely vicious cycles, aren't they? In terms of, I often tell the story of when I worked in a school and first getting involved in the educational technology space, and I went to the science department, and they were all teaching year 7. There was 8 of them or 9 of them teaching the year 7 class, and all planning the same information, same lesson, same content from the same
Right.
curriculum, and
Yeah.
planning it all in a silo, and then going into a meeting and having conversations about individual students. And I'm thinking to myself, I remember the first time I showed them, and it was only simple Google Classroom, Google
Right.
Slides, it back in those times, going, we
Yeah.
can collaborate on this stuff. Why don't you have a collaborative scheme of learning? Why don't you have shared docs and shared slides and put things on Google Classroom? And they were like, but I need to personalize it and adapt it for my learners. I was like, absolutely you do.
Yeah.
But you can, and you can do that rather than
Yeah.
doing everything from scratch. And so the problem then, if I'm hearing it right, the problem is that you feel like teachers, or a lot of teachers, find themselves in a silo, lack of organization in terms of not their fault, but because there's so much that they're going at, and they work in silos, and you want to try and create a space that removes that, but also helps ensure that that knowledge is transferred wherever they need it to be. Is that fair, or would you take that a little bit further? Tell us a little bit, maybe a little bit more about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. But I think what's underestimated is the impact of solving that problem. It's easy to put it out and say, okay, we're going to break down the silos and we're going to standardize knowledge capture and make sure that it's available to everyone. That sounds great. But you have to think about the second order effects of solving this problem, right? And the second order effects of continuing to allow it to persist. Okay. So the latter is where we are today. And the reason that people don't think about this much is because it's the water we swim in, and it's kind of just the way that things are. But when a teacher has to put their energy towards, and you've already alluded to this, Ben, when they have to put their energy towards creating from scratch, that is energy that is stolen from the personalization. Right? It's not just that, well, I need to personalize, and so I need to do everything from scratch. This is not a binary, right? Just as you were pointing out, if you get handed something that is already, let's say, 80% of where you need to be for your students, that means that you only need to close the 20%. But most teachers are not there. Most teachers are being handed almost nothing, and then having to first create a baseline and then find some time to personalize it for the needs in their classroom. Right. So the second order effects, which are invisible to us because they're the status quo, is that most teachers, and this is what I would say is the hardest part of being a teacher. The hardest part of being a teacher today is that the job feels impossible. It feels impossible. And it often is impossible to meet the needs of all of the individual students in your classroom. Right. This is one of the things you guys talk about a lot. Like, every student needs something different. And one teacher in a room of 25 kids, like, good freaking luck. Right. But the thing is, we can get better. We it's not a binary. It's not either you can, meet everyone's needs or you can't. We can get to a place where more needs are met. And the best way to do that is to free up the teacher's energy, space, time, so that they are actually able to focus on personalization. But if the teacher is scrambling just to have something, some baseline to present, some material to give, if they're figuring out all their schemes of work themselves, if they're creating all of the stuff from scratch, if they're figuring out their context at the same time, and they're trying to personalize on top of that, it's just not going to happen because of the simple capacity. You just can't do it, right? And so the hardest part of being a teacher is that every teacher wants this. Every teacher wants to personalize, wants to meet the needs of the students in their classroom. We want this, right? And we can see the needs. And oftentimes we even know, at least we know the starting point of how we go about meeting those individual needs. But at the end of the day, there's nothing left. There's nothing left to give. There's no margin. There's no place. And so the hardest part of being a teacher is not the workload, and it's not the timing, and it's not, the lack of respect of behavior management. For me, the worst part of being a teacher is seeing needs in your classroom very clearly and knowing that you have to let those needs go unmet because you simply don't have the capacity to meet them. That's the hardest part, because there's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame that comes with that. So the second order effects that I'm most excited about solving this problem is if we can get to a baseline where a teacher takes on a new role or has a course, right? And everything they need, the whole scheme of work, everything down to the minute, right? They have a baseline of like, these are all the materials you'll ever need. These are all of the different ways of approaching. These are all of the slides. It's all there. It's all been developed. And it's been developed by colleagues in your same context, right? So it's already somewhat personalized for where you're at. And you have that from day one. Well, then what's left? What are you going to do with all that time that now is available to you? All that cognitive space, all of those decision-making power, all that will. What are you going to do with that? Well, there's only one thing to do with it. It's to take what you've been given and to personalize it for the students who are actually in your classroom this year. But you simply can't. It's a completely different world. You cannot do that if you're also building the plane as you fly, right? And that's why I think this is so, so important.
I suppose when you talked about that often teachers will know change is needed and they want to make
Yeah.
a difference, but they
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
have the capacity to change it. How do we juggle? Because what often is caused by decades, years, days, weeks, months, and build up of not being able to change anything and just been having to just sit in, can't make a difference, I can't make a change, or them feeling so they don't. How do you change that behavior? Because that's culturally, everybody wants to change, or everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change. And that's really difficult. Even if they want it, if they've just got so used to being able to, or been unable to enact change themselves, whether that's through leadership and the conversation. How do we change that? Is that top down? Is that bottom up? What is the approach of you, your organization, or just your thoughts on that, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's always got to be a both end, right? And it really depends on the institution that you're in. Like some teachers are given way more autonomy in certain institutions than in others. Some are extremely micromanaged, and you're going to have a much harder fight if you want to implement any change. But I think, you know, to come back to what I believe the second order effects of solving this problem are, right? It's not just the teacher's individual time and cognitive space that opens up. If you take that and you multiply it across the entire organization, one of the reasons that change is so hard in schools is that the systems that schools are built on are so fragile. Okay, everybody is running at maximum capacity just to keep this thing afloat, just to make sure that the kids are all here, that nobody slips through the cracks, that lessons are actually happening, right? That there actually is some progress being made, and they're all so fragile that there's extreme resistance to any kind of disruption, because the worry is that if we try to do something new, if we launch a new initiative, if we try to switch this up, then the whole thing might fall apart. Right? Like, no, you don't understand how hard we've worked to get to a place of stability in this institution, right? And that's often how teachers individually feel as well. Why don't teachers experiment more with their instruction? Well, if they've put 5 years into finally getting a course where they go, okay, this is developed enough to a point where I don't have to rework it every year, or I don't have a bunch of gaps to fill in, then they're going to be a lot more resistant to change, because they go, I finally got to a place where I'm not freaking out every week to make sure that I've got something to teach next week, right? So if they've reached this place of stability and they go, I just can't even think about doing something different right now, because it's just so hard. It took me so long to get this place where I've reached some point of stability. And then you take that and you multiply it across all of the people in an organization. That's how you get a really rigid structure. But if you can create an environment where the same systems are working, and this is going to be a bit counterintuitive for you guys, I think, because we really want to lean into disruption. But I think what you have to do first, you have to create space for disruption. All right. If someone is in a hypervigilant state, if someone is spooked, right? Good luck talking them into doing anything, right? You need safety, right? You need psychological safety. And the way that you're going to create that organizationally, right, is to say, okay, we found a more efficient way to keep things running, just the way they are. Okay. And when you do that, then you freed up extra capacity. So here's an example on the micro level, and you can see how this would work on the macro level. If, again, a teacher is given 180 days, let's say, of instruction, and they've got every single piece that they need to deploy that, they've got a huge safety net. Okay. So now, whereas before they may not have had the time or capacity, they couldn't risk spending, let's say, 3 hours of their day trying to design a new project-based approach to this lesson. Okay. Because what if it doesn't work? What if they can't finish it in time? Then they don't have, there's no safety net. There's no way for them to go ahead and do something else, right? There's nothing for them to fall back on. But if you have captured all of that, and if they do have that safety net, well, now they can go, okay, wow, I can experiment. I can take something, I can spend more time. I can spend 3 weeks developing a new unit, right? That takes a completely different approach than everything else. Because guess what? Just because I've taken those 3 weeks doesn't mean I've fallen behind on building up everything else I need. See, so we have to help schools see that by moving in a new direction, they're not giving up the stability they've already achieved, right? and that they can take intentional disruption without huge amounts of risk to like everything falling apart. I think that's what you've got to create, is that sense of safety. And where we've gone wrong in the past is we go, okay, well, we got to rip everything up and start over. I mean, that might be true, but good luck convincing someone that that's what they've got to do, right? You've got
Yeah.
to come in a little bit more stable approach to the bottom. Yeah.
100%. And we know that, in fact, even just recently on LinkedIn, I put a post out about if I could do anything, and I was conversation around. I use the phrase, and we always use the phrase education revolution. And I've been
Right.
using that
Yeah.
phrase for a long time because, and this is the reason why we use that phrase. We use that phrase because we've been led to believe that education will evolve to meet the needs of learners and the needs of society, and it hasn't. And that's the truth of it. So what we're saying is, and I know some people might disagree with that, but I think the argument is that education is not moving at the pace of change, never has moved at the pace of change. And interestingly, the numbers that we're talking about now, 1 million young people that are NEET, greater levels of persistent absence than we've ever found in the history of education. We've got or full-time education, at least for everybody universally. We've got greater numbers of teachers leaving, fewer numbers of teachers joining, greater number of head teachers thinking about leaving, and leaders in that space. So what we're saying is we are on fire, and therefore we need to do something. But I do agree with you about the concept of nobody wants to change quickly or wants to rip it all out, because ultimately, how do we? Because we still got. It's not like we can. Okay, well, I'll scrap it and we'll build something new. Because
Right.
you're right, you said we're building it as we're flying the plane, and I get that. So I think what you're talking about there allows us to iterate whilst we go, and actually do something that's really hitting the one of the big challenges. So if one of the big challenges is about teachers spending time doing things that could be spent or better spent elsewhere, then I think that's a got to be something we explore, hasn't it?
And when you're talking about rapid change, right, like revolution, this is another point where, like, look, the transfer of knowledge is the key here. Okay, let's say that you guys succeeded in setting up a new school. Let's say you started a school yourself, and then you had contrarian thinkers hired in each position, and you found a brand new way to approach school, and it was working for all of the kids. How are you then going to replicate that? Right? If you don't have that knowledge captured in a way that's accessible and transferable to other people, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to do it. You're going to have to then go into those classrooms and try and figure out, okay, well, what actually is happening here and how do we replicate that? But if we have a place that's already been established where instructional knowledge can be captured and transferred, then you're enabling that transformation to happen faster. Because as soon as it works, it can spread, right? And it can spread. Crucially, it needs to be able to spread within the institutions that already exist, because as we've already said, they're not going anywhere, right? They're not going anywhere today, at least. So how do we make a channel by which different approaches can spread quickly throughout those existing institutions? And right now, I just don't see that channel exists, in most places.
And do you feel, in terms of somebody who wants to change, but also is trying to not influence, you don't want to influence that, you want to engage and ultimately provide a service, a solution. Where do you see the role of EdTech or providers or organizations like yourself trying to provide development, but also cultural change to try and help adoption of a product or a solution? Because I think that's that quandary of so many tech organizations are interested, and they're just interested in picking one or two. But actually, if they spend more time with the community, trying to engage to change the culture, ultimately the adoption will be greater because they will see the benefit. Is education ready? We've just talked about it for 10, 15 minutes of It's not ready for
Yeah.
adoption. It needs a revolution, evolution, all those kind of things. What is the role of EdTech and providers then to try and change that culture ready for greater adoption and engagement with opportunities and organizations like yourself?
Yeah, I don't think that I can speak for EdTech as a whole. What I can speak for is myself and the way that we've approached this, and I, we do it for a reason, and I take a really principled approach. Um, EdTech for EdTech's sake is never going to be a good thing. I think that one of the biggest problems that EdTech has is that it's often a solution in search of a problem, right? They're not actually meeting people where they're at. They go, look at this cool thing we can do, and the teacher's like, sweet, whatever. Like I've got papers to grade, I've got things to do, right? So what that you've given me a 500th, the 500th method to developing a quiz? Like, is that really what I need right now? No, I think ultimately what we should do is if we should start from the problems. We should start by meeting people where they're at, and that means to a lot of people discomfort who talk about education revolution, that means helping people do what they're already doing, okay, but doing it more efficiently. It does mean that. It does mean that at the outset, because if you don't create that first, then you're not creating space for any kind of change, okay? So what we've done is, we've created a place where you can create your courses, you can capture your units, you can create lesson plans very, very quickly. And you can do that in a place that really organizes them in a way that's never been organized before. And so we don't come in immediately saying, hey, you should, in fact, we don't at all say, hey, you should change up your methods or your methodology or instructional approach. Instead, we say, here's how we can help you by taking your current planning and prep methods, which are siloed, which are not talking to each other, which are not highly organized, and putting them in this highly organized place. That alone is a huge culture change for most schools, right? And then what we're doing, a lot of what we do, in fact, most of our expenses, if you call them that, are spent on human time with the schools, saying how do we implement this? Why is it important? And coaching teachers on how to implement this into their daily workflow. Because if it's not daily, if it's not something that you're engaging with daily, and if teachers don't feel that it's bringing intrinsic value to their daily practice, then it's never going to be impactful. You have to focus on how does this deliver for the teacher every single day, and your product has to be built around that as well, right? And if it's not delivering intrinsic value to the teacher, not only is that not really creating value in the school, but also long term your product will fail, your company will fail. I believe it every time. The problem is in education that there's a shortcut to revenue, right? And there's a shortcut to growth, and that shortcut is bypassing the actual experience, the lived experience of the teacher, and selling simply to administrators or leaders or government officials who fall for your flashy slides, right? And you can do that. You can do that in the short term, but in the long term, what you'll find, and as EdTech is kind of having a bit of reckoning right now, and finding out, if you do that, if you make that your business model, then eventually the house of cards will fall down, because the adoption rate in the schools is essentially zero, and you've not actually done anything to create value there. So, you really have to take a bottom-up approach when it comes to product, even if you are selling by necessity top down. Yeah.
No, and I definitely hear that as well. And part of what I hear from the heart of who you are and what you're trying to build here is this idea about keeping the teacher and their instincts at the center of this.
Yes.
And I like how intentional that is, because if I'm really honest, if you watch, not all, but you see a lot of principles or technology companies or whatever, where the learner stays at the center. And I'm interested just to kind of dig into that. What's the thought process behind an organization that thinks that the teacher needs to be at the center as opposed to the learner being at the center?
Well, it's the teacher's job to put the learner at the center. And in fact, I would argue that the teacher is the only person that is the only possible way to put the learner at the center. See, it's a non sequitur to say that education or that some education technology tool can put a learner at the center of anything. I'm not even sure what they freaking mean by that, because
okay, just let me stop you then, because
Yeah.
ultimately, if you're saying it's a non sequitur and you're saying there that you can put the teacher at the center, the same logic applies. You as an educational technology company can't put the teacher at the center any more than an educational technology can put a learner at the center.
No, the reason that I think that there's a difference there is because the student is often not in control of the situation, right? The student has very little agency as far as what's happening in the classroom, and the technology that they're being exposed to and the way that they engage with it, right? And so that's one thing. The other thing is that that the students are not. You're kind of at the end point at that point. Okay, students are not necessarily they're not trained to their profession, so to speak, is not necessarily to focus upon themselves. Their brains are developing oftentimes. Okay, they're not able to take the kind of decisions that they need to make in order to metacognitively put themselves and their own growth at the center of what needs to happen next. Now that changes as you get older, but the whole point of education, especially at the earlier levels, is that we're helping humans form into larger and more mature humans, because at this point they're not able to self-direct that process, right? And so with the difference is that teachers have agency. Teachers can choose how they interact with technology, and teachers are humans, which is very, very important, who are trained and focused and mature enough to be able to then metacognitively engage with another human being, take in all of the factors, and go, how do I serve this human being's needs, right? A technology, a digital technology, an AI, whatever, is not an embodied emotional, psychological presence, which is what we need as human beings, especially as we're being formed. We need, the vessel for human formation will always be other humans, right? And so if you try to bypass humans and just go straight to the student without that vessel in between, that really scares me. I think that's I think you're cutting out something essential, and you're really not going to like the result.
I agree. That I think the human formation element, and I'm with you on that. Sorry, Steve, I know I've jumped in again, but the human formation thing implies or suggests that sometimes, in fact, I actually think you're making another assumption here, that human formation by other humans is a net positive, because that's not necessarily the case, is it? I've literally been sat in a car this morning with my daughter, and I'm not. This is not my anti-teacher, because I'm the biggest pro-teacher person you can meet. What I'm not bought into is the idea that that human formation of humans is by default has to be better than machine version of that, because if you've got a really good human building it, there's a challenge there. But I was just sat in a car this morning. This is where I'm going to go with it. I sat in a car this morning with my youngest daughter, who her report has just come out. It's phenomenal, it's phenomenal. She's in top set maths, and she was talking. I said to her, "Oh, what lessons have you got today?" And she's telling me about what she's got. She said, "I've got maths with this teacher whose name I won't mention live on a podcast that's going to go out around the world." And I said, "Oh, I thought you liked her, maths teacher." And she went, "She's a good teacher, but she can just be unkind." I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, there's a lad in my class," and she went, "He's in top set maths, so he's good at maths, but he just does things a little bit slower than everybody else." And what she said to him, this is her phrase, she outed him in front of everybody, said that, "Come on, X name, you're not going fast enough. My bottom set did this like that. Why is it taking you so long?" And I thought to myself, that level of cruelty of outing a child, and I know that there's probably other context in that. He may well have been messing around, maybe other things that are sat in it. But a teacher said those things so much so that a few weeks later, after a weekend, my daughter has remembered how that teacher made that other person feel, never mind how they made her feel. And we've all got stories of humans. I've been a teacher where I know I've said some stuff and I've gone, oh my goodness me, why have I said that? I shouldn't have said that. And I've had to apologize if I've remembered, or there may well be things that I've said to young people that I wish I'd have never said. Like genuinely, all of us have probably got those stories. But the principle there is going, by default, there's an assumption that the human formation of other humans is going to be better than a hybrid. And I'm not suggesting that we do replace all human interaction, human formation with machines. But what I'm saying is that we can't assume that human is going to be implicitly good by nature, or can we?
I think there's a couple of different things at play there, but my counter argument, even for that instance, would be, okay, obviously teachers can sometimes be out of line, and we can have negative experience with teachers, especially when they say things that are hurtful, or when they they communicate in ways that are not a net positive for students. And we've all been there on both ends of that if we've been teachers, right? But I'd be careful to say that a big part of school and a big part of every experience that we have is learning how to navigate being in relationship with other people, even when they have done things that are, and especially when they have done things that are not the best, right? When they've communicated in negative ways, or they've done negative things against us. Now, I want to be very, very careful here and say that doesn't mean that there's carte blanche for teachers to give negative communications to students. But what I'm saying is, no matter what human relationship we have as we develop, where there's always going to be, if you're in relationship with someone enough, there's always going to be some negative element that arises, right? I'm sure even you and Steve have had disagreements, or have had moments when you've really not been great to each other, right? And you've navigated past that, and you're still partners, you're still friends. And I think, that is one of the elements that is really, really hard for us to bottle. Is really, really hard for us to replicate. That I don't think can be replicated with machines. And it's a part that you lose if you go that route completely, especially, right? We aren't just, when I say human formation, this is one of the things that you brought up in your pre-notes. Like, when we talk about education, are we just talking about the transfer of knowledge and skills? And absolutely not. Like, depending on how you define knowledge, but if we're just talking about like facts, let me transfer the facts I have in my brain into your brain. That's absolutely not it. It's about character. It's about learning how to interact with the world. It's about how you know who I am in relation to you, and how to interpret and how to deal with communications that come from other minds to my mind. And in many ways, the knowledge and the skills that we learn in school are just vessels for learning how to interact with the world, right? How to interact with other human beings. And so if we take human beings out of the equation, just because we might get some negative experiences from that, I actually think that backfires, because you're going to face those negative experiences in some context in the future, no matter what. Better to face them, as you're growing, and learn how to deal with them. Right. Now, obviously, that really shouldn't be coming. The vast majority of experiences that are negative should not be coming from those who are responsible to look after you. But sometimes they will do. Right. And, I think that's part of life. That's part of growing up. That's part of learning how to navigate the world.
Yeah. And also, I think we see a lot of the term conflict seen as a real negative state on social media, on the news, and everything else. Conflict is often portrayed as this thing that you should avoid and try and find a resolution before conflict engages or enables. And I'm not talking about war and some of those bits, but that has a knock-on effect on how conflict in business, conflict between learner to learner, student to learner, humans to humans in general. And how do we engage, and how do we support around the edges so that is supported, engaged, and actually pushed and prompted? Because actually, disagreeing but finding a resolution and a middle ground, or just agreeing that you won't find a middle ground. I think this, you think this, and that's okay, and we can still like each other. I don't think we really do anything. And if you think about and apply that to EdTech, you know, me and Ben were at an event recently, and there's this and probably we were part of it. You know, when we were in education, the whole Google and Microsoft, or I don't use this tool because I only use Microsoft. I only use this tool because I only use Google. But ultimately, for such a long period of time, it was like, oh, we don't speak to each other because Microsoft and Google. I'm like, it's a tool. Like literally, I think people see it as that thing of Joe. You have a difference of opinion, so surely you can't be friends and be in the same space. How do we prepare society? This is going somewhere completely different, says potentially the stuff. But I think we have to oversee that, because if we're looking at learner by learner and staff by staff, in terms of the pace of acceleration and adoption, some teachers will avoid it for a long period of time. Some people will be able to navigate as a take a tool and apply it quicker. And that should be engaging in conversation in a staff room or in a culture of an organization to then say, it's fine, you might not get it right now. You might not get it for a long period of time, but I do, and I'm going to try it. And this will, and we should be okay to accept that people will accelerate and implement things at different paces at different times, and still disagree that actually you could transform 90% of an organization and they might buy your product, but actually 10% they never engage in it because they just don't agree with it in their context. You can try and take them along and try, but they are the harder people to engage. Have you seen that and organizations, independent international schools or states that have adopted and maybe tried to push that as a you might not get it right now, and that's okay?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of what we do, again, like I said, the vast majority of the cost to us, right, is the human interaction cost, because human time is the most expensive thing, right? But we still continue to engage multiple hours, especially at the outset, live, one-on-one with every institution that we work with. And one of the things that we say again and again and again is, this is going to follow a normal distribution curve. Right? You're going to have your early adopters, you're going to have your middle, and then you're going to have some people that will just never touch the tool. They're mad that it exists, right? Like before they ever log in, they don't even know anything about it. Just the fact that there's another thing or a different thing is just enough to set them off, and they're just going to be mad that we're even talking about it. And that's going to be true in just about every organization, right? Depending on how big it is. But the bigger it gets, the more likely it is that you have people in each party. And one of the things that I say to schools regularly, and I make sure that our staff communicate as well, is oftentimes the people that are the most resistant to change are the oldest and most experienced, especially in schools, right? They're the people that have been teaching the longest because they're the older generation that has seen so much change. They're just freaking tired of. I mean, can you imagine how much change you've gone through if you were born in the 60s right now? I mean, it's insane. I can imagine just being exhausted with the rate of change itself, let alone anything else. And I think it's really, really important that respect, a baseline amount of respect, is communicated for everybody in the process, right? And for me, one of the most successful lines of communication I've had, especially with older teachers who go, why would I do this? Why would I engage in this? I've had a stable ground. I've had my practice for sometimes 30 years. I've been doing it. And I say, well, that's precisely why I want you to engage, because where's your life's work right now? Where is it? How is anyone going to be able to take everything that you've developed over the last 30 years and find value in it and build upon it? And how is that going to have any impact beyond your own immediate classroom? If it's all tied up in binders on your shelf, right? What I want to do is preserve the work that you've done, right? What I want to do is capture all of that wisdom that you've built up and have that become part of a collective pool of expertise that can then go on and have a wider impact in the greater profession. Um, I want that for you. And sometimes we've even had, we advise schools and we say, look, the best you're ever going to get is that people aren't angry about it. They're okay with it. And sometimes, right, with some people. And then especially when it comes to technology, some people just don't feel savvy enough. They're intimidated by it. They're never going to sit down at a computer and interact with the program. So get a younger teacher, get someone who is excited about it to come alongside them and help them capture what it is that they've done so that their work is preserved, right? And communicate it that way. Like we respect your wisdom. We respect the things that you've done so much that we want to help capture them so that they can carry on and we can build on them. But having that baseline respect and empathy for that person's position and why it is that this might be intimidating or scary or even angering for them, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I know this resonates with something that we spoke to Gwyn at Perry about, Gwyn from XP Schools, who talked about the idea of understanding our contextual heritage and not like if you live in a mining town, you should understand, even though there's might not be any miners there anymore. I think there's a crossover here in terms of like not thinking we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of us who have been teaching a long time really have got a lot of, and we don't use the word, apparently we're not allowed to use the word lived experience when it comes to inclusion and SEN anymore. But like, I think a lot of us have got experience, whether it's lived experience or not, of things that work, things that didn't work, lessons that were really good, activities that were great that we could probably repurpose and rethink about. So we don't want to just say, right, oh, here's a whole new set of AI generated something, or here's a new set of personalized through AI or adapted through AI. Like nobody wants that. So because there is some benefit in the collected wisdom, and I think that's part of it that sits in there. We always finish our EduFuturist podcast with 3 quickfire questions, and so I'll do the first one, Steve will do the second one, and then I'll do the last one. And then if there's anything else you want to share for our listeners towards the end, then you can do so. But they are quickfire. Some people nail this and some people don't. But let's see. So, if education was judged like restaurants by how much the customers enjoyed the experience, what do you think would change overnight?
They enjoy. I think there'd be a lot more leisure time for sure. I think there'd be a lot more time for people to explore their own interests. That would be the biggest thing. I mean, we're talking about how much people enjoy their experience. I'm thinking of students. Students' number one thing would be like, can we just not run such a crazy schedule? Can we not have so much on our plates? Can we have more time to explore our own interests and spend time with our friends? And I don't think that that's something that we should discount.
What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
I think the most dangerous myth is that they can't, that they don't have any power to change things. That is by far the most dangerous myth, because if you believe that, then you won't even attempt it. And I think that that's where we're at with a lot of people right now. And it's also why people both leave the profession and don't recommend that others go into the profession, even though they love teaching. It's because they don't actually believe that change can be affected.
Clear. And if a 10-year-old asked you why they actually have to go to school, what would you say?
I think it really depends. It depends on the 10-year-old, doesn't it? Yeah. In some cases, right, you've got to go to school because mom and dad need to work. I think that's oftentimes the real answer, right? That's something that isn't talked about enough. But school is, in many cases, just an economic benefit in the sense that parents are freed up to go to work, right? But if you have options to do otherwise and you are sending your child to school, I think oftentimes it's because this is going to be a good place for them to learn how to be and interact with the world. And that's the short of it.
Say 4 out of 5, 4 out of 10. for quick fire, but good answers. Like them. Quick fire is always an interesting thing because we struggle with asking the questions, and also people then go, "We've just spent an hour exploring and deep diving. You're asking me now to rapidly respond in a few words. What have you done to me for the last hour? You're fighting against me." So yeah, it's been an absolute great conversation. I think interesting thing is we get EdTech and providers, but also people that have been in education that have now stepped into what often people would say the dark side. Really, I think they get it more than people have never spent any time in education, and maybe that should be a learning curve that actually work experience for EdTech of actually seeing what it's like with people in the classroom should be something that is stepped into to mirror and see actually what a day in the life of an educator and a leader in education looks like. But it's been a great conversation. Been great to pull it into a podcast after Ben's conversation and then seeing you in Liverpool. Yeah, fingers crossed. It will make a dent into the space. I know it's probably a low time, but I think let's see where we can take it. And I think it's going to be really exciting.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Been a
We'll
pleasure.
make sure there's links in the show notes to what Grant's talked about to Edusfere, and also all the links into getting involved in the Wolfpack, getting hold of the book, all the other bits. You can find that in the show notes. Grant, thanks for joining us, buddy.
My pleasure. Thank you, man.
See you, mate.